Before we begin, this entire narrative has been compiled from court transcripts, FBI files, archival interviews, and documented historical accounts. Our sole purpose is to present a verified, factual record of a life lived in the deepest shadows. This is not a glorification, but a dissection. A story where silence was the ultimate weapon, and survival was the only victory. Now, I want you to imagine something. Imagine every mafia movie you've ever seen. The shouting, the violence, the flamboyant suits, the dramatic deaths. Now, erase all of that. In its place, picture a man so ordinary, so deliberately forgettable, that he became a ghost while still breathing. A man who sat in the same room as legends, who handled the same money, who knew the same secrets, but whose name never once appeared in the newspaper headlines that destroyed his bosses. His name was Dominick Cersani. And if you want to understand how the mafia truly worked, how it really fell, and what it took to simply walk away while everyone else was buried or imprisoned, you need to listen to the story of the man nobody heard. This is the story of the quietest soldier. And by the end, you'll understand why the most dangerous man in any room is often the one you never notice. Stay with us. The story of Dominick Cersani is not one of meteoric rise or volcanic temper. It is a masterclass in strategic subtraction. Born in the 1930s in the heart of Brooklyn, he grew up in a world where the mafia was not a cinematic fantasy but a local utility. A shadow government that provided jobs, settled disputes, and enforced its own brutal version of order. This was the ecosystem that nurtured him, a neighborhood boy with watchful eyes and a quiet disposition. While other kids dreamed of flashy notoriety, young Dominick absorbed a different lesson. Attention was a currency, and spending it carelessly could bankrupt you. His entry into the life wasn't marked by a dramatic initiation or a notorious murder. It was a slow, seamless osmosis into the crew run by Paul Vario, a captain in the Lucchese crime family whose power base was Idlewild Airport, now JFK. The Vario crew was a predatory engine, and its lifeblood was cargo theft, hijackings, and systematic corruption. Here, Dominick found his education. He wasn't the brawn, though he could handle violence when necessary. He wasn't the charismatic schemer like his associate, the volatile Jimmy Burke. He was something far more valuable, a reliable, low-frequency asset. Cersani became a trafficker in stolen goods, a mover of unseen merchandise. His genius lay in his operational security long before the term was common. He understood that every conversation could be bugged, every associate could turn, every transaction could leave a paper trail. So, he built his life on minimizing risks. He avoided telephones, preferring face-to-face conversations in moving cars or noisy diners. He never sought a high profile, never flaunted wealth with garish cars or suits. He lived in a modest home, kept his family life utterly separate, and presented to the world the unthreatening facade of a simple working man. This was his armor. While the flamboyant Henry Hill, another Vario associate, was living a cocaine-fueled fantasy and drawing massive heat, Cersani was a ghost in the machine. He was present for the planning of some of the crew's biggest scores, including the legendary Lufthansa heist in 1978, the largest cash robbery in American history at the time, but his role was carefully insulated. He was a facilitator, a connector, a man who knew a guy who could move the hot money or store the fur coats. He understood that the real profit wasn't in the initial score, but in the patient, silent liquidation of the goods without a trace. As the heist's aftermath spiraled into paranoia and murder, with Jimmy Burke ruthlessly eliminating anyone he suspected of being a loose end, the streets ran red with betrayal. Yet, through the chaos, Cersani remained untouched, a still point in the turning world of carnage. His survival wasn't luck, it was a direct result of his perceived utility and his demonstrated silence. He was a steady earner who caused no problems, drew no eyes, and asked no questions. In a world built on greed and ego, Dominick Cersani had mastered the art of being usefully, profitably boring. He was the embodiment of the old underworld adage, the fish who doesn't open its mouth never gets caught on the hook. And as the federal net, tightened by the RICO Act, began to descend upon the New York families, that simple philosophy would become the only thing standing between him and the utter ruin that consumed everyone he knew. As the 1980s dawned, a cold wind of reckoning began to blow through the streets of New York, sweeping away the old order with the ruthless efficiency of a federal broom. The Lufthansa heist, intended to be the score of a lifetime, had instead become a deadly poison, unraveling the Vario crew from the inside out through a trail of corpses and sowing seeds of distrust that would blossom into full-blown betrayal. This was the era of the turncoat, the government witness, and Dominick Cersani watched it all unfold from his carefully maintained position in the shallow shadows. While the flamboyant and addicted Henry Hill, drowning in debt and paranoia, began his frantic dance with the FBI, eventually becoming one of the most famous informants in history after his arrest in 1980, Cersani did not panic. He observed. Hill's cooperation, immortalized in Wise Guy and later Goodfellas, was a seismic event that exposed the inner workings of the Vario crew, leading directly to the imprisonment of Paul Vario and the murderous rampage of Jimmy Burke. Yet, as name after name was dragged into the spotlight, flipped, indicted, or buried, Cersani's name remained conspicuously absent from the indictments and the headlines. His survival through this period is the clearest testament to his methodology. He had never been a confidant to Hill in the way that invited intimate betrayal. He was a peripheral, professional associate. More importantly, he had never given anyone enough substantive, provable evidence to trade for his own freedom. He was a rumor, a whisper, a face in a surveillance photo that prosecutors couldn't quite make a case against. While the Mafia's code of omerta crumbled under the weight of lengthy prison sentences, Cersani's personal code of operational silence held firm. He adapted not by becoming more secretive, but by becoming even more ordinary, further receding into the fabric of everyday life. As the FBI's organized crime task forces employed RICO statutes to dismantle entire families, targeting the hierarchies rather than individual crimes, Cersani's low ranking, soldier status became an unexpected shield. He was not a captain, not a conspirator in the high-level meetings the feds were wiretapping. He was a worker. And as the five families were plunged into chaos by the Mafia Commission trial of 1985-86, which decapitated their leadership, Cersani continued his small-scale, high-caution operations. He understood that the empire was falling, not with a bang, but with a series of guilty verdicts and cell doors slamming shut. His goal shifted from accumulation to preservation. The downfall of those around him, Vario dying in prison, Burke convicted for a fixed Boston College basketball game and later for murder, a whole generation of mobsters locked away, served as his daily object lesson. He witnessed the fatal flaw of the traditional mobster, the inability to evolve, to become truly invisible in an age of electronic surveillance and financial paper trails. Cersani, in his own quiet way, evolved. He became a relic of a dying breed, not the loud, caterwauling gangster, but the patient, pragmatic criminal entrepreneur who viewed flash as fatal. His criminal activity became so measured, so integrated into the grey areas of business, that it became nearly indistinguishable from legitimate enterprise. He wasn't just avoiding the law, he was avoiding the very profile of a target. In an environment where every friend could be wearing a wire, Cersani's greatest strength was that he had no real friends in the life, only contacts. He had built not a personality, but a persona, that of a simple, unassuming man, and he wore it like a perfect suit of armor, walking through the firestorm of the FBI's greatest victories without a single spark landing on his coat. The final act of the American Mafia's dominance was not a single gunshot but the slow, suffocating squeeze of time, technology, and relentless prosecution. By the 1990s, the world that forged Dominick Cersani had all but vanished. The social clubs were shuttered or bugged, the old neighborhood loyalties eroded by globalization and generational shift, and the remaining mobsters were either aging in prison or reduced to penny-ante schemes, a pale shadow of their former predatory glory. It was in this twilight that Cersani's philosophy faced its ultimate test. The Lucchese family, like all the families, was a fractured, paranoid shell, hemorrhaging members to witness protection and plagued by internal power struggles that were now settled in courtrooms rather than back alleys. Yet, Cersani, now a man in his 60s, remained. He was no longer a young soldier but a seasoned, almost anachronistic figure, a living archive of a bygone era. His continued freedom became a quiet legend in certain circles, a proof of concept that his way had been the right way all along. But the federal government had not forgotten. The pressure was ceaseless and more sophisticated than ever. The RICO net, which had snared the bosses, was now cast wider, aiming for the mid-level operators and even the foot soldiers who had somehow slipped through previous sweeps. Tax investigations, parole violations, any minor infraction could become a lever to flip a man or put him away. Cersani navigated this perilous landscape with the patience of a chess master playing a very long, very slow endgame. He did not retire in the traditional sense, that would have drawn attention, but he allowed his criminal profile to diminish, to fade like old ink. He likely relied on the small, legitimate businesses he had undoubtedly nurtured over the years as fronts and investments, understanding that a consistent, modest income was the best camouflage. The violent passions of his youth were replaced by cold calculation. He watched as the new threats emerged, not just the FBI, but the Bratva, the cartels, organizations with a different, more international and less structured brand of brutality that made the old mafia almost seem quaint. Cersani's adaptation was to become a non-entity in this new world as well. He was not a player to be challenged or co-opted. He was simply there, a ghost of the past. Law enforcement, frustrated by his elusive nature, certainly kept him on their radar, but building a prosecutable case against a man who left no trail, bragged to no one, and committed crimes through layers of insulation was a monumental, often futile task. They needed a Dominick Cersani to make a mistake, to get greedy, to finally talk. But he had spent a lifetime training himself not to do those very things. His downfall would not come from a grand jury indictment on murder or racketeering, but from the attrition of age and the constant, low-grade scrutiny that makes any criminal life a grinding burden. Yet, even under that microscope, he held. His story through these decades is one of remarkable stasis in a sea of chaos. While John Gotti, the Teflon Don, finally saw his coating wear off and died in prison, and while his own Lucchese boss, Vittorio Amuso, ruled the family from a prison cell via bloody proxy, Cersani remained outside, breathing free air. His original crew was gone, dead, imprisoned, or informants. He had outlived his mentors, his associates, and his enemies. His survival was his victory, and his victory was profoundly solitary. He had achieved the paradoxical goal of being a successful, lifelong criminal by refusing to be defined by his crimes, by ensuring that his legal identity was always more credible, more solid, than his underworld one. In the end, the empire did not just fall around Dominick Cersani. It dissolved, and he was the residue that remained, a particle of the old world that neither settled nor evaporated, but simply persisted, untouched and untouchable, a quiet testament to the power of absolute self-control in a profession defined by its catastrophic lack of it. And so, we arrive at the silence. The story of Dominick Cersani does not end with a dramatic arrest, a dramatic death, or a dramatic revelation. It ends, as it was lived, in the quiet margins of history. To search for a definitive conclusion is to misunderstand the man entirely. He crafted a life without an exclamation point, and his exit followed the same meticulous design. In his later years, as the 21st century marched forward, he became less a person and more a precedent, a whispered example among law enforcement and the dwindling underworld of what was possible if one mastered the self. The furious storm that had taken down empires, Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, had reduced to a drizzle, and Cersani simply stepped out of the rain. He died in 2021 at the age of 90, not in a prison infirmary or on a street corner, but in the obscurity he had so fiercely cultivated. His death certificate listed natural causes, a final, fittingly ordinary notation for a man who had devoted his existence to the art of being unremarkable. This is the core, unsettling truth of his legacy. In a world that celebrates the loud, the violent, the notorious, Dominick Cersani proved that the most effective power is often the power that is never seen, never heard, and never claimed. His entire career was a rebuttal to the mafia mythos. He wasn't a stand-up guy who gloriously did his time. He avoided time altogether. He wasn't a feared boss commanding armies. He was a soldier who commanded his own impulses, and that was the only army he needed. His loyalty was not to a family or a code, but to the principle of survival, and in that, he was uncompromising. While the Henry Hills of the world traded their stories for freedom and immortality in pop culture, Cersani traded his story for his life, and he kept the transaction secret. He is the answer to the question we asked at the beginning. How did he avoid it all? He avoided prison by never giving the state a solid case. He avoided betrayal by never giving anyone enough of himself to betray. He avoided death by never presenting himself as a threat or a prize worth the risk of killing. He walked away because he was never truly in the way others were. He was always slightly adjacent, a step to the side, a man in the periphery of his own life. His biography is written not in his actions, but in the absences, the indictments that lacked his name, the surveillance tapes that caught only his back, the murder lists where he was never a target. He is the negative space in the picture of organized crime. So, what made Dominick different? He possessed a superpower in a world of supervillains, mediocrity as a conscious discipline. He understood that in the end, the system, both the criminal one and the justice one, was designed to capture characters. He refused to be one. He was a data point that didn't fit the curve, a variable the equations couldn't solve for. And in doing so, he achieved what all those famous, feared, and fallen mobsters could not. He died an old man, in his own bed, free. His story is not a blueprint, for it requires a renunciation of the very ego that draws most into the life. It is a cautionary tale in reverse, warning that the greatest threat to power is not a rival, but oblivion. He let the spotlight burn itself out on others, content to be warmed by its distant glow. He witnessed the rise, the reign, and the ruin, and he passed through all of it not like a king, but like a ghost, present, influential, but ultimately untouchable and already fading from memory. Dominick Cersani's legacy is the sound of a door closing softly in an empty house long after the riotous party has ended. It is the proof that sometimes, the most shocking thing a criminal can do is absolutely nothing at all. If this deep dive into the shadows held your attention, if the story of the ghost who outlived the giants made you think, then your engagement is what allows us to unearth these hidden histories. We dedicate significant time to researching and compiling these narratives from verified sources to separate fact from folklore. So, if you want to support this mission and ensure you don't miss our next exploration into the forgotten corners of true crime and history, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. It costs you nothing, but it means everything to us. And in the comments below, let us know, who is another enigmatic, low-profile figure from history you'd like us to profile next? Your input guides our journey. Thank you for listening.